Here's a hearty welcome, big and warm enough to encompass all of you. To say that we are thrilled to see all of you is an understatement. Thank you, and again, a big welcome to all of you to the Women and Energy Transition in the Arctic. We are absolutely thrilled to work with IACN, the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network, and in cooperation with the Icelandic Ministry for Foreign Affairs, the Embassy of Canada to Iceland, the Embassy of Iceland to Canada, the Northeast Iceland Regional Development Agency, SSNE Iceland, the Directorate of Equality in Iceland, EHRC, Electricity Human Resources Canada, Women in Energy Iceland, and Arctic Services. Again, a huge welcome to all of you. At this time, I would like to welcome Ms. Stephanie Day, Director of Research Partnerships at Ryerson University, for her opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're calling in from today. As Joanna said, my name is Stephanie Day. I'm currently Director of Research Partnerships at Ryerson University. Formerly, I led UN Women's Program on Gender Equality in Canada that focused on building best practices across G7 and the European Union. I'm really excited for today's conversation because it's so important that we continue to have these conversations to really understand how we can increase gender equality and focus on gender equality in various sectors around the world. At Ryerson, we focused on best practices. At UN Women, we also focused on best practices. And what we learned is that it's so important for organizations to tap into a framework. At UN Women, we use the Women's Empowerment Principles. At Ryerson, we use the Diversity Assessment Tool. What that means really is that it doesn't necessarily matter the tool that you use, but it's so important for organizations to tap into a framework, to start taking stock of where they are in terms of gender equality and diversity and inclusion, broadly speaking. We don't know where we're going if we don't know where we're coming from. So getting those first stats on your organization on where you are is so important. And what we've also learned is that women are not homogenous. And I'm sure everybody who's joining us today will agree that women are not homogenous. And we've really started to advocate for organizations to take an intersectional approach on gender equality, to understand that one's identity is not just based on gender, but can be informed by your race, your religion, your ability. So what does that mean? That organizations should not just think about gender specifically. Do we have women? But do we have women with disabilities? Do we have Black women? Do we have trans women or LGBT women? Really broadening how we look at gender also makes the difference. So I'm really excited for today's conversation. We've got a fantastic lineup. A big thank you to Women in Renewable Energy for organizing this wonderful panel. And I'm sure we'll have so much insight. So without much further ado, I'll hand over back to Joanna so we can kick off the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these empowering and powerful words, Stephanie. It's always a pleasure. Before we get into the introductions, I would like to invite Federica to give us an overview into IACN.
Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today in this important discussion on women and energy transition in the Arctic, the second event of the Renewable Energy for Sustainable and Inclusive Development in the Arctic series. My name is Federica Scarpa, and I'm Communication Manager for the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network, which is based in the north of Iceland in Akureyri. The Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network was born and established in 2013 with the mission of initiating, encouraging, and facilitating Icelandic and international cooperation on Arctic issues, including research, education, innovation, monitoring amongst public and private organizations, institutions, business, and bodies involved in the Arctic. We are very, very pleased to work together with WIRE and the partner that Joanna introduced to you in organizing this series of 4 online events under the framework of Share Your North webinars, Renewable Energy for Sustainable and Inclusive Development in the Arctic series, hosted by Share Your North. Share Your North is an online platform offering lecture, conversation, and interviews on life and development in the Arctic. I will shortly add the link in the chat box. Again, welcome, and thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you also in our next event. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Federica. So my name is Joanna Osawe. I'm the President and CEO of WIRE, Women in Renewable Energy. Our mission is extremely simple. It's to advance the role and recognition of women working in the energy sector. We have a lot of different fantastic programs. Not only do they include networking meetups, speed mentoring, speed interviewing, field trips, we do workshops, conferences, we do awards. As a matter of fact, some of our featured panelists have been featured on our Wire Spotlight, Michelle Branigan, Stephanie Day, and Robert Hornung as well. We continue to grow our programming and needs to expand and make sure that women and all have a platform to come and really come together and solidify this message on gender equality, especially in the renewable and energy sector. We not only are here in Canada, but Wire has expanded and grown into many different international countries, including Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Jordan, UAE, and the most newest chapter is in South Africa. We are currently looking to open up Wire Malta and Wire Sweden as well, and we'll continue to work with the chapter leads in the respective countries to ensure that programming is appropriate in those demographics. I also want to make sure that all the folks here today, applaud all the partners that Wire has, including EHRC, CanRIA. Of course, we are partnered with IACN, so we are super pleased to be having this important discussion. I like to say that, we have to have these awkward discussions and we have to be comfortable having these discussions. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our amazing panelists. We have with us Malgorzata Smieszek, who is with Gender and Environment in the Arctic, assessing the role and potential of gender diversity and inclusion. We also have Michelle Branigan with EHRC, the president and CEO. We have Mr. Robert Hornung, who is the president at CanRIA, the Canadian Renewable Energy Association as well. And Hjalti Ómar as well, who's a Directorate of Equality Iceland, and of course, Harpa Petursdottir, who also is with Women in Energy Iceland. Before we get into the moderating panel, I would like to invite every panelist to provide a quick description and introduction to one another. So perhaps Malgorzata, we'll start with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Most of all for having me here for this absolutely excellent panel. I mean, it is really delighted, and already how Stephanie introduced the discussions, I think we are really onto something very important here. So perhaps let me share my screen to share some of the initial comments that hopefully can contribute to this discussion. And I was particularly pleased when Stephanie mentioned that it is important for the organizations, for different kinds of bodies to take stock of where they stand when it comes to gender equality, equality in general. And I think that this presentation can perhaps provide us some kind of background for this discussion, particularly in the Arctic context. So, as said, my name is Gosia Smieszek, and I'm here with Women of the Arctic, which is a nonprofit association registered in Finland. So myself, I'm based in Norway, and my colleague Tani Pryor, she's based in Canada. And the aim of Women of the Arctic is to raise awareness, is to support raising awareness and maintaining focus on women and gender-related issues in the Arctic. And part of the work we do is through digital storytelling platform and other materials that can be found on the website genderisnotplanb.com. So it was with the work of our association that we contributed to the central project that I wanted to say a few words here about, and it's Gender Equality in the Arctic Free, which was project of the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Group and of the Icelandic chairmanship of the Arctic Council that lasted from 2019 to 2021. So to those in the audience here less familiar with the Arctic context, the Arctic Council is the primary intergovernmental forum for cooperation and collaboration on common Arctic issues, particularly related to sustainable development and environmental protection. So Gender Equality in the Arctic Free was the third phase of the project, and its main aim was to produce the Pan-Arctic report on gender equality in the region, something that was actually for the first time undertaken on such a scale. And here on this, I mean, I warmly encourage everyone to go to the report itself. And I think Federica or Hjalti can surely share the link to the website. But here on this slide, I wanted to, the contributors that you see were contributors to the chapter that we co-led together with Tani. It was chapter on gender and environment in the Arctic. And as you can see, it was very international, very collaborative effort. But here I wanted to give particular shout out to two persons that helped with the chapter or with the section related to energy. And it was Sarah Seabrook-Kendall from the University of Iceland, but also Devlin Fernandez from Gwich'in Council International. So a few words first was why the chapter on gender environment make it to the report, to the Pan-Arctic report on the gender equality. Most of all, because as mentioned, environmental protection and sustainable development are a central part of the mandate of the Arctic Council. But of course, in addition to this, what was of particular importance was the recognition of how central is natural environment to lives of people in the Arctic, and of course, the expanding scope and accelerating pace of climate change in the region. But I think what is particularly relevant to our discussion here is, of course, is a number of developments that go along climate change in the Arctic, and of course, especially expansion of natural resource uses, both when it comes to fossil fuels, extractive energy resources, but also renewable energy. So the main aim of this chapter and of the report in general was to contribute to our understanding of trends and issues in the region with a particular lens of gender-based analysis, and to support in the future a more systemic engagement of the Arctic Council with gender matters. Hence, I was, like I said, particularly pleased hearing Stephanie at the beginning that it's how important it is to kind of to take stock and understand where we stand at this road before we move forward. So not to take too much time with this presentation, as I said, the chapter covered actually many more issues than those related to management of natural resources. So in addition, we covered also issues related to gender and pollution, gender and marine issues. But here I kind of I wanted to share very briefly some main findings that we have seen from different sections related to management of natural resources in the north. And of course, the first point that you can see here on this slide, I mean, it comes without much surprise to anyone, is of course that we have seen across all sectors that all resource-based industries in the north are heavily male-dominated. One other thing that we have seen in different case studies was, of course, or maybe one day I wouldn't need to say, of course, but uneven effects of development projects across genders. At the same time, that was not something that we could always track very clearly, because oftentimes, and this was another finding that we have found consistently, there was the question of lack of sex and gender disaggregated data. So even though we had quite a few case studies, I mean, altogether it was very difficult to combine all the resources we've had, and oftentimes the information was simply missing. Two other things I wanted to mention here, but of course they come from a slightly different sector, from mining, but I think they're the findings, the main insights from looking into this project are perhaps relevant to have in the back of our minds when we discuss those things. Was of in the example of mining, the question of gendered and intersectional effects on the communities. That's maybe I should pause here, that as much as it was possible, we were taking intersectional approach and looking at the different categories that Stephanie mentioned in the beginning as well. But two points relevant here was, for instance, the technical nature of environmental impact assessment, which as it was consistently found in different case studies makes those kind of assessments really difficult to incorporate collective perspectives into them. Perspectives that actually oftentimes bring women into discussion more than male participants in the consultations. Well, on the other hand, what we have seen in the Scandinavian Arctic in the mining sector was that even though we observed the advancement of gender equality in the mining, the discussion has started about the risk of reducing gender equality to exclusively quantitative issues, that we should be looking beyond numbers. Of course, numbers are extremely important, and I very much look forward to presentations from other speakers today. But of course, this should not be the end point of our discussion. At the same time, what we have seen in mining was the potential to redress perception of mining as men's work through innovation. And I think this is another thing that points to renewable energy particularly well and for our discussion. With respect to renewable energy, just quickly, I mean, one finding which, well, you could say was no finding in a sense, was that there was virtually no discussion of gender in the context of renewable energy and green transition. So even though, of course, the theme of green transition is very much picking up also in the North, for instance, green transition is now supported in the very latest Arctic strategy of Norway. There is, we have constantly found that there was, that this transition and increase use of renewable energy hardly ever includes discussion of gender aspects. From a very different angle, and namely when we wanted to look at the impact at the gender impacts of renewable energy projects, we have found one particularly interesting and I think illustrative case with the Old Crow Solar project in Yukon, where it was very clearly showed that diversity of perspectives taken into account when projects are being designed and implemented, in that particular case, help to meet energy needs of the community without compromising this community's well-being and other activities. And not to go into details of the project, it was something what I like to think in terms of what solar panels and blueberries have in common, where initially women were not involved in the consultations of this project. It was decided that the solar panels for the community would be situated right in the middle of the best blueberry field, where actually women tended to spend a lot of time. And that was really important for their well-being, for bonding together, and just as an important activity. By including the perspectives of women and improving this consultation process, it was actually possible to address this challenge and find a solution that, as said, provided greater energy security for the community, but at the same time served well-being of everyone. And finally, here, what we have also seen is that renewable energy production in the Arctic as elsewhere is more diverse than fossil fuel sector, but it is nonetheless still less diverse than other areas of economy, which of course shows the potential for further improvement and advancement. Last thing here, perhaps just to share one slide from the report and to illustrate how so far little systematic engagement with gender and gender issues has been in the work of the Arctic Council, is this slide showing the number of the Arctic Council reports and assessments, basically since the establishment of the Council, where you can see more than 200 reports of the Arctic Council, and very, very few of them that, well, I should say, I cannot unfortunately say engaged with gender, because basically the threshold that we established was very, very low. It was only a question of how many times they included word gender, and the minimum was 3 times. Long story short is definitely there is a big space for improvement, and I very much hope that this discussion will contribute also to that part. So in the last words, as said, there is very limited incorporation of gender-sensitive approaches in decision-making processes across all sectors, including those related to management of natural resources. Fortunately, what we can say is that tremendous championing by Iceland and this particular report, GF3, has contributed to the strongest statement to date on gender equality that was adopted as a part of the ministerial declaration of the Arctic Council in May 2021. And here you can see the statement, including the encouragement to mainstreaming of gender-based analysis in the work of the Arctic Council, and to furthering action to advance gender equality in the Arctic. So with that, I hope this provides some basis for our discussions, and I very much look forward to listening to other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gusha, for this, for the gender equality in the Arctic. You know, it's an international collaborative project which highlights the importance of recognition and appreciation of diversity in terms of discourses, gender, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, governance, education, economies, social realities, sustainability, and balanced participation in leadership and decision-making, both in the public and private sector. So thank you so much for that important message. Before I introduce Michelle Branigan from EHRC, not only is she a partner of WIRE, but a friend of mine that I consider very close. You know, one of the things that we would love to hear Michelle speak about is women at management level positions in the industrial sector and their role in shaping the energetic transition in Canada. Michelle, before we go into your discussion, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and really the question that we're posing is, did you want to speak generally to the leadership report and the issues, barriers, opportunities of women in the C-suite? So again, I will pass this off to you because again, I know how much information and data you will provide us. So off to you, and thanks again.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I'm delighted to be here. So thank you to WIRE and the Icelandic Arctic Corporation Network for the gracious invitation. So I'm Michelle Branigan. I'm CEO of Electricity Human Resources Canada, and we're a national non-for-profit organization. And our mission is to support the workforce needs of the sector. And that means a workforce that is safety focused, of course, highly skilled, productive, and diverse. Now, it's that last word that is still challenging for our industry overall. Our ongoing labor market intelligence, or our LMI program, allows us to collect data about the industry. We look at demographics, we look at some of the challenges and the issues that are emerging, and we address those. That has repeatedly shown that despite women representing over 48% of the Canadian workforce now, only 26% of workers in the sector are actually women. And if we look at some of the occupations, the trades, for example, that number falls into single digits. And those numbers are reflected in oil and gas and manufacturing industries as well. Now, as Joanna had mentioned, we have conducted a fairly recent study on gender equity called Leadership, where we actually looked at the number of women on boards and in C-suite positions across the sector. We wanted to understand the unique challenges facing women's advancement into leadership roles, and then explore the structural and the cultural barriers that are impeding women making progress into those key and influential roles. Now, the research very much mirrored what we saw across the wider industry, that there are significant gaps around women's representation, around the decision-making tables of the electricity industry. And I will put the links to the report into the chat once I just finish my remarks. Now, what we found, some of the highlights, 1/4 of electricity companies in Canada have no women publicly listed on their executive at all. 23% of our boards have no women or only one woman member. And research suggests that those who are the only one, whether it's on a board or in the field, can face challenges in having their voice heard and may sometimes be seen as a token, the token hire. And they actually may feel as if they're only in that position and as a token. And I'm not sure which of those is actually worse. We have seen steady progress. We've seen some great additions to the ranks of female CEOs, for example, over the last couple of years. So I don't want to give the impression that progress is not being made. It is, but we need to accelerate that progress. We can't still be having these conversations in 30 years' time. Some more key data. Of the 26% of senior executives who are women, half of those are in corporate functions such as HR and communications and IT. Now, in this industry, roles in corporate functions rarely lead to the CEO positions. So that indicates that those women are likely missing the highly valued operations and technical experience that would propel them into the CEO and other key decision-making roles, or that they're hitting that glass ceiling somewhere within their careers. Because we know when we looked at the field of study of women, almost all of them had a university degree or a professional designation. And the most common fields of studies were commerce, the STEM fields, and law. So that's telling us that many women perhaps are not working in the area for which they studied and trained. And so until we actually start recruiting more women into these feeder STEM positions, the roles most valued for leadership in companies will continue to go to men. So that talks a little bit about the data. We also spent time during the research looking at organizational culture and the viewpoints of men and women who are actually working in the sector. And we discovered a stark difference in the perspectives of men and women on gender inclusion in the industry. A little bit wider than I actually thought that there would be, considering that we've been talking about this for quite a number of years now. But 18% of men surveyed believe that it's actually easier for women to succeed in their workplace than it is for men. And in contrast, 75% believe that women have a more difficult journey and that there are many barriers on the job, as well as in obtaining the education and the training that they need to be successful. Now, over a third of women believe that their advancement has been held back because of others' assessment of their technical skills or of their behaviors and styles, such as teamwork, their communication, or even their ambition. Whereas only 6% of men felt that their employer's opinion on their style of behavior has actually held them back. And that is something I have heard from women time and time again at all levels within the organizations. And these views really matter, because those who are actually positive about the career supports and the culture that they're in and recognize the barriers, they're more satisfied with their jobs, they're more likely to recommend working in the industry, and they're less likely to leave. Now, this was interesting in that the research also reported that women still have some doubts about the commitment of the industry's leaders, including within their own organizations. And so Gosh's points here about the fact that discussions about renewable energy and green energy don't include gender resonated with me. We heard from women that the majority of them feel that leaders within the electricity sector are not at all interested in increasing the numbers of women in leadership, and that a lack of executive commitment limits women's progress in their company. However, almost half of the men we spoke to felt that the leaders are very committed. So it appears that men and women are actually hearing very different messages. That's something that's really important for us to understand. Now, we also talked to men as well. We've done some great case studies of why men have become champions in the industry. When we looked at why men sometimes were not more vocal allies to gender diversity, we heard that some men don't see that there are gender barriers. They think it's been sorted. They don't think that they actually have the scope or the ability to make change, or they're deterred by a concern that merit will actually be put at risk, that women will get promoted over under candidates because of gender. And The research also found that men are not the only ones who might be hesitant to take action on gender issues. About 1/3 of our respondents also believe that women avoid supporting initiatives. In some cases, they fear potential backlash or reputational risk. They don't want to be seen as making waves or being labeled if they push too hard. So that in itself, while understandable, it can be a little bit disheartening. It suggests that they don't believe that the organization is truly committed to gender inclusion as a positive focus for the business. And again, I really think it's critical that we understand why women's workplace experiences often differ so much from their male counterparts. It's critical that these differences in perspectives, because otherwise it makes it very challenging to reach agreement on actions for change. And as Stephanie said, I absolutely agree. It's so important to remember that while all women may encounter similar challenges, not all women are going to experience them in the same way. Racialized women, Indigenous women, LGBTQ plus women, women with disabilities, for example, all have very different lived experiences that mean they may face discrimination on multiple levels and in different ways. And some barriers may continue to exist for them in the workplace, even when gender barriers have been moved. I'm an immigrant to Canada as well, too. I have talked to my colleagues. My experience being white and having English as a first language has been very different from those of my colleague who is Black and has English as a second language and an accent, for example. So these are some of the things that we need to empathize and put ourselves in other people's shoes. Now, of course, we're already all aware that the industry is in an extraordinary time of change. We're talking about going green with our energy policies. We're talking about amazing new technologies changing the grid. We're also talking about many countries dealing with aging workforces. And there is increasingly more pressure for organizations, of course, to be more diverse and inclusive. And that is driven by societal forces and clear messaging that the status quo is no longer acceptable. Any transition to clean energy has to be built upon inclusive policies. And we also need to recognize, of course, that women are being disproportionately affected by the pandemic and that current social inequalities are being exacerbated. So, in this context, a focus on accelerating the advancement of women is really timely. We do have an ethical obligation to ensure that everybody in our society feels capable of pursuing a career, regardless of their gender, their background, and any other parts of their identity. As I look to wrap up, we have an incredible story to tell in the energy sector, the clean energy sector. We know that the next generation is values driven, care deeply about a meaningful commitment to diversity, minimizing environmental impact, and corporate social responsibility. And we've heard from so many women that they need to understand how their work contributes to the greater societal good. And I believe that a job in renewable energy, in clean energy, brings that to the table. The opportunities there to make a difference are immense. We do have some great success stories to share, and the women who are working in the sector are very passionate about their ability to make a difference. So we need to build upon those role models to encourage more women and young girls to work in the clean energy sector. But it's going to take coordinated effort. It's going to take multiple strategies. And while standalone programs and initiatives are wonderful, they're not sufficient in and of themselves. It's going to take collaboration, communication, commitment. And I do believe so strongly in this, that every organization needs their leadership to advance not just the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, but to actually make it part of the organizational culture. And setting goals and measuring results is absolutely key. Going back to Stephanie's remarks, if we're going to affect cultural change, if we're going to implement good practices, we need to measure and report on the progress achieved and the benefits gained. And it doesn't matter what framework you use, just use something. We are also advocates of WEPs. And of course, EHRC have developed a leadership cord on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a framework to help companies to get started. So if you're looking for a tool, please check that one out as well. It's so important to understand where you fit right now, and set goals and targets that you can measure to see how you're progressing. But women need to be part of this change in our industry, and indeed driving the change. So I'll wrap up there. I'm watching time, and thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to the Q&A later.
Thank you so much, Michelle. You know, one thing that you definitely, it always strikes me, but it is our collective duty to drive DEI. I really stand behind, you know, it's our ethical obligation. You know, you talked about significant gaps, and I talk about this often, and you and I have shared many panels together and moderated together. I'm a huge believer that everyone deserves a seat at the table. And for those that are not familiar with the Leadership Accord on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, it is a public commitment by Canadian employers, educators, unions, associations, and governments to advance, integrate, and prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization's policies, processes, culture, and workplace environment to proactively create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace. Wire, Women in Renewable Energy, is a huge advocate and champion of the Leadership Accord on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So thank you so much, Michelle, for the amazing remarks. And I will continue to move to Mr. Robert Hornung, who will focus on his journey at CanRIA on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we are so happy and thrilled to welcome you, Robert, to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And as Joanna said, my name is Robert Hornung. I'm the president and CEO of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, and we represent about 320 companies active in the wind energy, solar energy, and energy storage sectors in Canada. It's really a great pleasure to be here today for what is a very important discussion. Because while there's little doubt that renewable energy is going to be a cornerstone of the energy transition, a cornerstone of our energy future going forward, we have to acknowledge that around issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, the composition of individuals within the renewable energy industry is more reflective of the past than of the future. We want and need our sector to be representative of the society that we're hoping to service and provide benefits for. And we are far from that at this point in time, as previous speakers have already identified. And that's a challenge. And as we look forward, and it's heartening to see that all of the, well, an increasing portion of discussion around the energy transition talks about just transition, talks about incorporating equity concerns, gender concerns, diversity concerns moving forward. And that's going to be critical to ensure its success, because it really will be a joint effort where we need the best of everyone to make it happen. Despite where we are today, I do want to echo a little bit what Michelle said, in that I think we are making progress. I've been involved in the renewable energy industry in Canada for about 20 years. In 2003, I started working with the Canadian Wind Energy Association. I went to my first annual conference for that organization. And frankly, I was shocked and appalled at how few women were actually there. It was less than 10%. I'm guessing it was 5% of attendees at the event were women. And today, I'm reporting to a board of directors within the Canadian Renewable Energy Association that is 10 women and 6 men. I have an executive committee within that board that is majority women. Now, the point was made, numbers and quantifying this aren't the whole story, and that's absolutely true. And we still see that we do have a lot of work to go. Our organization, CanRIA, has recently created a leadership council where we've looked at 20 of our leading member associations and brought together sort of senior executives, vice president or higher, to come together as an advisory body for the association as we move forward. Of those senior executives, 75% are men that are participating on that council. We have, as a staff team at CanRIA, a nice split, 50% women, 50% men. But I can tell you that anytime we are looking for new individuals to bring into the organization, the gender silos, for lack of a better term, are very clear. When I'm trying to hire someone who works in policy, I'm going to find that 80 to 85% of the resumes I receive are from men. when I'm looking to hire someone in communications, administration, events management, I'm going to find that 80% of the resumes I receive are from women. And that's indicative, I think, of how deeply rooted the challenges are in terms of where people see themselves fitting within the industry as well going forward. So we still have a lot of work to do. And I say we because I think success is ultimately going to require the engagement of many different organizations and many different champions. And it's a pleasure to be here with on this panel with a group like Wire, who's really done, I think, an incredible job in terms of bringing together and empowering women in the renewable energy industry through opportunities to network, to learn, to mentor, and to celebrate the incredible women within our industry and the accomplishments that they've achieved. We've tried as an organization to provide a platform for that work and to support that. You look at organizations like Electricity Human Resources Canada and the Diversity Accord that was spoken of earlier, again, providing tools for industry to move forward and to try and tackle these challenges. And that's very, very important. Because as I said, I think success ultimately will require a broad network of champions. And those champions can't just be women. They need to include people who look like me, people who are privileged and fortunate not to experience the barriers that women do face within the industry, in terms of entering the industry, in terms of moving into certain positions within the industry, in terms of moving into senior management within the industry. And I actually think that we need more of these champions who have the capacity, but I would argue more importantly, the responsibility to work to try to remove some of those barriers. Now, I know that there's multiple studies out there that illustrate the performance benefits for organizations when you have a more diverse workforce, a workforce that is more representative of the society you're trying to serve and that you function within. And those studies are very important, I think, in terms of trying to broaden the number of champions who can work on these issues and can do that from within their own frameworks and what they're trying to achieve in terms of moving forward for success. But I certainly hope that we get a growing number of champions in this area who just want to do this because it's the right thing to do, because fundamentally it is the right thing to do. And I know that myself personally and my organization, CanRIA, frankly, need to be doing more. In many ways, we're pretty late to the game, I would argue, on some of these things. It's only this past year in our organization that we created for the first time a board committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This was the first year we're at our annual conference. We had a session dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the first year where our board actually used its power to appoint board members to address gaps within the board, and actually used that ability this year to appoint an Indigenous woman to the board to ensure that we had reflected in discussions at the board a perspective of someone who could bring forward Indigenous experiences and knowledge in terms of interacting with renewable energy projects to our discussions. And it was important that that happened because it was recognized that that was critical for us to be more representative of the industry and also more representative of the outcomes we're hoping to achieve going forward as an industry. So I have to admit, I've described those things, and I will be the first person, I guess, to say those are baby steps. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And we're still very much in early days in trying to move this forward within our organization. Nonetheless, they're the first steps in what I hope will be a continuing journey to move forward and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within our industry. And as an organization, we're now starting the work that others have described here on this panel, developing that baseline, getting the baseline data that we need to be able to establish targets and measure where we're going and how we're going to get there. We're looking at, as an association, developing action plans that will allow us to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion within our events, within our organization, within our governance. We're looking at mechanisms whereby we can support our member companies, our members, to actually promote equity, diversity, and inclusion as well. And in pursuing these objectives, we're really heartened by the fact but we know we're not alone. And we look forward to enhanced collaboration with organizations like WIRE, Electricity Human Resources Canada, and others to help us on this journey as we move forward. I will say, having been in the industry for this period of time, the progress we've made, I think you can measure a little bit. We've made some progress, but I think the more important progress we've made is in the dialogues that are occurring. This is an issue that is increasingly being discussed. This is an issue that is gaining a growing number of champions. And I would like to think that our association can play a valuable role in bringing those champions from across the industry together so that they can share the challenges they're facing, the experiences they've found in terms of trying to move forward, and the solutions they found in terms of trying to advance these issues within their own organizations. So I just want to close by saying I'm very thankful for the opportunity to join you all here today. I think as an organization, we want to move forward and become more of a champion on these issues. And to have the opportunity to be here today and to learn from all of you is very much a privilege. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Robert, first and foremost, thank you so much. And I just wanted to share this with our distinguished guests, is that Robert has always been a champion. As a matter of fact, back in 2013, when CanWIA, which is now CanRIA, Robert gave us a platform to launch WIRE. So again, the fact that you've always been such a champion and you are consistently moving that dial, Robert, you know, we applaud you and thank you so much for everything that you do within our industry as well. So again, a huge applause to you. And moving on to our last but not least, Ms. Harpa, who will talk about the tools to bring equity and fairness into the energy sector. So Harpa, have you seen an actual change in the sector and in the minds of those working within the sector since we started applying these tools?
First, I wanted to share with you my presentation, which I hope is okay. Do you see my screen now? The slides?
Yes.
Yes, very good. So yes, I wanted to start by thanking you for inviting me here today. What an honor. As Joanna said, my name is Harpa Petursdottir, and I am the founder of Women in Energy Iceland and have been its chair from the founding of the association. I'm also the legal advisor for the National Energy Authority in Iceland, and I have been working in the energy sector, in our case, which is the renewable energy sector, since 2010. I was asked to tell you about the tools that we have been using in our association of women in energy here in Iceland to achieve our goals. But first, I would like to give you a little glimpse of how we came about, how and why we were established as an association to begin with. So in January 2016, we established Women in Energy Iceland. And this was around 18 months after the idea was born, which was somewhere mid-air on the way to Reykjavik from Akureyri after a big energy conference. There were, at this conference, it was the first time I was there, and there were strikingly few women. This is actually funny to hear Robert say a very similar reaction to what he had experienced, and that's where the idea of our association was born. So my idea was therefore to try and gather these women together, hoping to strengthen our network and empower each other so that we would become more visible in our network and also in society. We announced the establishment by word of mouth and on social media to take place in the canteen of the National Power Company. We were expecting somewhere around 30 to 50 people, but to our surprise, we had to relocate the event as there were over 200 people that had signed up. At this moment, we realized that the women, they weren't actually that few, they were just not visible at all. So today we are around 400 people of all genders in our association, And the silver lining of this, the thing that happened in the north was the establishment of Women in Energy Iceland. I didn't mean to put this there, I'm sorry, but I couldn't resist. It was a good day, I will tell you, the founding meeting of the association. Now, to tell you a little bit about my other tools that we have used, which is the core of my input here, that we have used to achieve our goals. I want to start by talking about our reports. These are reports on gender diversity in the Icelandic energy sector that we have published in cooperation with Ernst & Young Iceland. The first one was issued in 2017, when we realized that we needed a starting point, a bottom line, to be able to measure the development, to get a clear picture of whether our work and input was really moving us any closer to our goals. So in this report, we ranked the largest energy companies in Iceland by the proportion of influence that women have on decision-making within their companies. So the highest one being the closest one to a 50-50 ratio. Now, today we have published 3 reports. Our most recent one is from last December, where we were, fortunately, proudly able to show green numbers, some positive moves from the former ones. And I want to share with you a few of these numbers, even though it's in Icelandic, but I will talk around. So the first number, the one on the left, means that in the last 2 years, we have moved up by 8% in chairman of the boards. And in the last 4 years, we have moved up by 33%. The next one indicates that we are down by 2% of other members of the board in both 2 and 4 years. This might be understandable considering that there's a substantial increase in the chair of the boards. The third one means that we are down by 8% of presidents or CEOs of these companies, but this is actually a single person that quit. And on a 4-year scale, we see no changes. So we are still at 8%, one person. Now, the fourth one are C-suite officers, executives, where we have gone up by 10% in the last 2 years and 22% in the last 4 years from the first report. The next one is department heads. They're down by 6% in the last 2 years, but only 3% in 4 years. Lastly, the full-time employees are up by 5% in the last 2 years, but 7% in the last 4. And this, as well as the top level numbers, is the one that we are really focusing on improving, increasing the levels. So Ernst & Young has concluded that increasing the influence of women on decision-making within the energy companies is not merely a matter of fairness, but a matter of doing better business. And their analysis has shown that a more even gender distribution on the boards of companies and the executive teams has positively affected the bottom line. And according to their studies, an improved gender balance on executive teams can also lead to an increase in return on investment by up to 2.1%. I have to tell you a little side note here that in Iceland, we do have legal acts that require that both limited liability companies as well as public companies with more than 50 employees must ensure a ratio of 40-60% of each gender on their boards. Now, another tool, I probably talked a little bit too much about the reports, but they have proven to be essential on our journey. Next, I wanted to talk about a study that we have also done on how women in the energy sector perceive their work, how they feel while working in the sector. And we do these studies on the opposite years of the report. So we conduct this study on we call it the softer side of working in the sector and how we feel. And we are asking our members questions such as whether they are satisfied in their jobs, if they think others have received credit for their work, are they being overlooked for promotions, and questions related to sexual harassment, to name only a few. But this has given us important indicators, varying even depending on age, seniority, work experience, etc. And these results we have used these results to encourage the energy companies to act on the conclusions, their results, and thereby improving the experience of these women that are working in the sector. Now, the slide is just to give you a little image of how we present the results. And in this slide actually is the question, on the whole, how happy are you in your job? And we have quite a nice outcome there. Very happy, and happy is what, 90%. So that's very good. In addition, we do have quite a few more tools that I would love to tell you about in detail, but considering the time limits, I will quickly list them up. Firstly, the equality stamp, this one here, that we grant to those who make sure that gender ratios are at least 40–60% of speakers at conferences. As you probably can guess, we haven't used it a lot recently due to COVID, but this was really sought after prior to the pandemic. Now, the Fall Congress, this one here, the Fall Congress is a gathering where everyone participating gets 3 minutes to tell about themselves, their education, and interests in the sector. This is mainly about getting to know each other. The media key, this one here, is something that we issue regularly and indicates the results of a media analysis on the presence of women in media talking about energy matters and the development of the ratio from time to time. So in this way, we can keep track of whether or not we have a presence in the media. Now, energy conferences on various topics we have regularly, and so much more. Visits and presence also in schools at various levels, presenting us and the energy sector as in general. Now, also, we have a lot of fun all the while. As you can see here, there is always something fun happening. So just a few final remarks. I believe that we are moving towards our goals, and I believe that we are doing something that really makes a difference. We have already seen quite some improvement within our sector and sparked a meaningful debate, as well as raising awareness of the need for change. And I think we can all agree that a more diverse input into decision-making in the energy sector and a broader perspective of the decision makers will have a positive impact, and that reaching our objectives is going to benefit all and provide us with a more diverse and inclusive energy sector, as well as a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harpa, for this very important, again, comments as well. I know that we have a few questions here. This is a report that's publicly available. Perfect. Great. Well, certainly we'll, Harpa, perhaps we can put into the chat where we can locate this report, as I know that there's a lot of interest. Without further ado, before we get into the Q&A, I would like to invite for the closing remarks, Hjalti Ómar Ágústsson, the Directorate of Equality Iceland, to give us his remarks.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Hjalti Ómar Ágústsson, and I'm a special advisor at the Directorate of Equality in Iceland. I was a part of and have been a part of the Gender Equality in the Arctic project from the beginning of phase 3. First as a project manager, but then as a special advisor from the Directorate, which has been a part of the project since its beginning in 2013. So we have been part of the Gender Equality in the Arctic project from the beginning. I'd like to start by thanking everybody for their presentations and this very interesting conversation we're having on gender equality in the energy sector. like everyone pretty much has touched upon, greater equality and diversity brings better results, which is kind of the key to everything we're trying to accomplish, which is to get a broader perspectives into decision-making processes, especially. And the report on gender equality in the Arctic highlights this very much. And it also highlights a couple of things that we have discussed here as well, which is the lack of data or information that is needed. And you have touched upon this as well, that without knowing where we are, we can't really decide where to go. And gathering information and data is really a key proponent of making sure that decisions that are made are sensible and to the benefit of the broader communities. Now, we have discussed the tools a bit as well, and some of the tools that we could be using for the purpose of greater diversity and equality in decision making can be found within gender-based analysis and gender mainstreaming, for example, where we can use gender analysis, gender budgeting, and processes that include different perspectives and account for different outcomes with regards to diversity and gender. And I'd like to point out with as respect to intersectionality and diversity in general, that gender is always at the center of it, because no matter which minority subsection of societies or countries, there's always the gender aspect. So decisions may affect indigenous peoples differently than others, but they will also affect indigenous women differently than indigenous men. So gender is always at the heart of it. And also to point out that it is the fight for gender equality that has brought all these issues to the forefront and made them, well, not to blanketly generalize, but it's a very big component of making these issues something that's in the focus and that people are addressing, that we want balanced and diverse decision making. And we have talked a bit here about the industry or the energy sector from, let's say, a professional point of view, from the point of view of the sector itself, management, employment, etc. And these are all important. And we talked about the lack of women in STEM fields, for example, and Harpa touched upon the importance of role models, both within the industry and within education, the importance of role models coming and talking to children. And this is such an ingrained thing that young women might not even realize the possibilities that are there, because they've been raised to think that it's not something that they should be thinking about. So making everyone aware, and especially in the education system from early on, that counselors and teachers are aware that they're not excluding futures in STEM from girls just through their rhetoric or attitudes. We also talked about the culture of masculinity maybe within the field, and the importance of, like Robert talked about, for example, the importance of addressing the culture within the organization, so within the energy sector. Harpa talked about this as well. If you have qualitative research and then you address the issues that come up for a better work environment, that address appropriate ways of interacting and inclusivity and family-friendly schedules and work hours, etc., etc. I mean, there's a lot of ways to address these things within the energy sector itself. There's also the importance of outcomes, the importance of how the decision making within policy and the energy sector itself affects the people that are affected. Gosia talked about this a little bit when she was in her presentation. I mean, who do mega projects benefit? What is the energy? Where is the energy going? It's going to mega projects, and who benefits? And is the energy going to big industry at the cost of energy for local communities? I mean, we know that women are more affected by the lack of energy in housing, for example, than men are. And so all these things combine to that we need to be thinking about who's affected, how they're affected, how can we offset the effects, how can we limit negative effects, and how can we make positive effects. And all these things need different perspectives in the decision-making processes, like gender-based analysis and gender mainstreaming, so that we know, middle-aged white men like me, we are very smart and we know a lot of things, but we tend to make decisions that may not represent the whole of the communities because we lack the experience, the lived experiences and the point of views of others in the communities. So we need a broader understanding of what we're doing and where it leads to and what effects they have. I don't want to make this very long. Federica was looking for someone very handsome and interesting that sounds smart, but she couldn't find anyone, so I'm here. So I don't want to make this any longer than it is, because mostly I'm very excited to hear the discussion and answering questions. So thank you all very much for this very interesting and important session, and I hope we can keep the conversation going.
Thank you very much for those remarks. We certainly appreciate it. And we welcome any questions and answers right now. So we'll open this floor to our attendees. If there are any questions that you would like to pose, please unmute yourself or post them in the chat. So perhaps I did see a comment here, and it was geared towards Gosia. Gosia, a few of the attendees are wanting to know how to connect with WOA. If you can provide some input, we would love to get connected.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So I actually put our email address in the chat. I hope it got shared. So to everyone interested in our work and willing to connect, we are more than happy for that. And if we could ask to send us an email at the address info@genderisnotplanb.com. This is perhaps the easiest and the best way. And I think if I may, it's since I've already taken the floor at this point, I think I wanted to reflect on the points that were made both by Robert and Harpa, because I think for me it was really interesting to see the report that Harpa was referring to and mentioning the study conducted by Ernst & Young that clearly showed the benefits from the business side for the greater inclusion, for the greater participation of women in the companies, and that it simply contributes to good business, so to say. At the same time, of course, Harpa also pointed out at the end the question, the real importance of diversity of perspectives that is so vital for energy sector, and Robert spoke about this as well. And I think I just wanted to go back to this and just share an additional point. So when I was talking about the work that we did in the report, one of the things that we have seen, it was actually in the mining sector, so slightly different, but the discussion that started in Sweden was that, not to look at the gender equality only in terms of numbers, but also to perhaps to have in mind that the business the business value argument could be kind of a double-edged sword, in a sense that if we argue for gender equality only on the basis of good business practice, then perhaps one day we could see the situation that perhaps if business trends change, whatever happens, then the same argument could be reversed, that if we no longer see the business benefits for the company, the profits coming with greater inclusion of women, then perhaps this trend would be reversed. So I kind of just wanted to put it out here. I thought it was really interesting in the studies, but I think also Harpa and Robert very well pointed out at this much greater value, just the right thing to do, and so much greater importance of gender equality in questions related to energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gosha. To all the panelists, if you don't mind turning on your cameras as we continue to go through the Q&A, that'd be fantastic. We do have a question, and this is really open to the floor. This question comes from Dorothy Shepherd, and it's addressed to all the panelists. She says, hi, in the UK, we have a gender targets in our industrial sector, but the fear of positive discrimination is an issue. There are leaders and role models in larger companies that are leading the way. The Powerful Women Initiative is also worth flagging. Can one of the panelists provide their insights or comments towards Dorothy's comment there?
I noticed this comment as well, and I wanted to make a short observation on that a little bit. We in Iceland, we have gender quotas, for example, on boards like Harpa talked about, it's 40–60%. And it did not come by out of the blue. It's because there is an implicit and unconscious bias towards hiring men. And when we talk about gender quotas, for example, the argument always comes up, well, what about, qualifications, merit? Well, to begin with, in the quota system, it's only when there are equally qualified, two equally qualified persons of different genders that you pick the one that we need to address. Like if there's fewer men, you pick the man. If there's fewer women, you pick the woman. But what is hardly ever noted is that if I were to apply for a job with Harpa, the implicit and the unconscious bias for the hirers would be to hire me because I'm a man. And no one ever asks a question, isn't that demeaning for men? Don't they feel ashamed that they were only hired because they're men? Because that's the reason we have the quotas, because I, as a man, would be more likely to be hired if we were equally qualified, just because of unconscious biases. And no one ever asks, well, that's embarrassing for you, isn't it? But it always comes up when we're talking about gender quotas. And one of the most interesting things is that when we're talking about gender quotas, everyone always says, yeah, you're just, trying to make things easier for women. Why do you say that? Because the quotas are gender neutral. You say that because you realize women are underrepresented and they are the ones who need the quotas more than men. But hopefully we will be in a situation soon where that will balance out, and it has happened, and it's happening in certain places as well. So maybe in a couple of years I will benefit from it myself.
Can I say just a very short comment? Thank you, Hjalti. Exactly. I mean, it's been quite it's been quite a few years since we changed our law so that now we have the quotas. But there is, in general, a consensus that this was a good move, that this was actually very beneficial for the companies in Iceland. But occasionally you hear exactly a middle-aged white man saying, why should I have to have this woman on my board when I can have a man that is more qualified? Well, you shouldn't be able to, based on this law. But have you ever thought about how many men are on boards that are less qualified? No, nobody's talking about that, just because they're men. I mean, but this is a fun discussion and very popular when you say that you're working on gender equality. But in general, people are really happy with this in Iceland, and they see the benefits.
And another small note on that is, with some exceptions, there are really no qualifications for being on a board. It's not like a diploma you get. You just pick someone. So what are the qualifications they're talking about? That's what I would like to know. How good at golfing are you? I don't know.
Joanna, I'd actually love just to build on that, because I just think it's so interesting. I agree with everything. And, oftentimes I have leaders sort of push back to me, or sometimes just managers. It can be at different levels within the organization, saying that we can't find women to sit on the board. They're not qualified. There's not enough women coming through. To me, I don't accept that. I always challenge, if you're seeing that, there is systemic issues within your organization that you need to be addressing as a priority, right? Why are you not looking at the pipeline? Why are you not supporting women that may need to gain some experience within the organization to sit on the board, to go into the leadership C-suite or whatever it may be? So to say that there's not women, we can't find women, to me, that is nonsense, and it should never be accepted as an answer from any leader in an organization.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Harpa, and Hjalti. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, just add one more thing too, just a small example. So within our association, our board is elected by the members. We have a nominations committee that goes out and seeks candidates. That committee has made a conscious effort to increase the diversity and gender mix of candidates that are coming forward. Has never had challenges finding qualified candidates. That's never been an issue at all. There is an interesting challenge in ultimately who members vote for. And you still, I would argue, see some biases in regards of that in terms of how that moves forward. So there are definitely the candidates out there. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I think it shows that there's still a broader education needed as well in terms of, in that case, amongst the voters.
Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, it's always nice to see friends and allies at the attendees. So Stephanie Landers, a huge shout out for you being here this morning. One of her question is she's wondering if you have found challenges with finding enough resources to do in school education and reach as many youth as possible.
I guess that's directed at me then. Well, there is, of course, within is gender equality legislation in Iceland that really emphasizes that you're not allowed to discriminate, and you're not allowed. You have to treat everyone with respect, and you have to promote all education to all students. Of course, that's the legislation. In practice, it's a bit more difficult because, like we said, we have unconscious biases, and we're a product of our culture, and people may unconsciously or consciously kind of direct girls and boys into different paths. But and there have also been like efforts to kind of address this, both with public awareness raising and then going into schools and trying to emphasize STEM, for example, for girls, and nursing and teaching for the boys, etc. Harpa would know this as well. I think she's been a part of some of those at some point. So there are efforts, but maybe not concerted enough. And like I said, legally, you're obliged as a teacher and educator and counselor to be gender neutral in advocating for future paths of education or work.
Thank you. I see that maybe we'll start off with you, Michelle, and then move to Gosha.
Great. Yeah, there's so many things. I'll try and keep it very brief, but absolutely. I think there's a lot of wonderful initiatives and programs underway in Canada here to get in and to engage with young people. I actually think we need to start it at a younger age group. We need to start it in elementary so that they understand what job opportunities are there in a fun way. But there's lots of great things being done by utilities, by organizations like ourselves, by organizations like Skills Canada, for example, going in and talking about the trades. But I think there's a couple of issues that are there. One, there absolutely is bias, whether it's a lot of times I think unconscious bias on behalf of educators and teachers. I have to say sometimes it is very explicit. I've heard stories of that as well too, which is unfortunate, where they tell young women that no, they shouldn't be going into this occupation, they shouldn't be going into trades and all that sort of thing. So there's a challenge there. So we need to educate the influencers, right? That's really important. The teachers and the parents as well too, taking it even out of the educational system, because they support children and their choices as well and expose them to different types of opportunities. So I think that's really important. And then the other piece of that is a lot of times you will actually have teachers who have great intentions, but they're just overloaded by so many different things. So how do we cut through and make it as easy as possible to support them doing that knowledge exchange with their students? And so that they're also aware and give them the tools that they need. So I think we've got quite a bit of work to do on a number of different fronts. It's not going to be just one thing on the education side.
Great. Gosia?
Thank you. I think I actually had a question, perhaps to Robert and Harpa. So I was wondering, in terms of, so how do you say in Canada and in Iceland, how does it actually work when it comes to public support or public or just policies supporting greater gender? I mean, Hjalti on the one hand pointed out, of course, as the gender equality law, the very general one, but I'm kind of wondering, are there any incentives from the authorities to kind of to promote greater diversity and inclusion, specifically in the energy sector? And I'm asking about this for a reason, because just very recently I had a conversation with Chief Sustainability Officer in one of the biggest energy providers in Northern Norway. And it was actually very interesting to see, as they are moving forward on the path of or toward greater gender equality, those are actually things that are coming, but from the leadership within the company, more than this is something that actually is supported by the authorities, or kind of because of certain policies were in place. And I was just kind of wondering, how does it work in Iceland and Canada? Or perhaps if you have any recommendations, how this action could be further strengthened. Thank you.
Can I start? So in general, the companies here in Iceland within the energy sector, they have, yes, they have their own policies. This is a decision within the board. Do we want to be a gender equal or diverse company or not? And I mean, it's a small country, so it is noticed when you're excelling, when you're doing good. So it gets a more positive feedback. They have a more positive image if they are, acting on gender diversity. They, of course, most of them have also policies regarding equal pay and stuff like that. But if I may talk a little bit more about our report, where we are ranking the companies according to how they are doing this job. And let me tell you, they get quite motivated to be the best. And those who are in the bottom, they want to do better for the next report. So it's a little bit of a competitive environment that we have created. And I will just tell you, I know this is recorded, whatever means, if it works, it works. And then also, we are a non-profit association. We don't get paid for our job, so it has to be our passion. But we need funds to do a lot of those things that we are doing. The reports are not cheap and so forth. So at the same time, we have a dialogue with all these companies on a regular basis. And we go to them asking for money to make our sector better. And it's really hard for them to say no, because of course they want to help facilitate what we are doing and reaching our goals. So I will tell you that we have 100% success rate when asking for grants and for individual projects or for our association as a whole. So this is something that, it's of course a small country, but this has really, really helped us on our journey.
Thank you, Harpa. Robert?
Yeah, I expect Michelle is going to be able to add more to what I might say here, but just to highlight that, I mean, I don't think strictly speaking, I don't think there are so many requirements per se. But an interesting change that's happened with the current federal government is that many programs now where you're seeking funding from the federal government require you to sort of provide an analysis or assessment of the implications for gender diversity, et cetera, and also often to describe as the proponent seeking funding to talk about what you're doing internally in terms of addressing gender and diversity issues. And there's another question that came into the chat, the last question there, which is on the same theme. And I would argue that, is that seen as best practice? I think in a sense, yes, but I would say it's very, very far from standard practice and within the corporate side. And I think when these requirements started to come out from government, I think it was shocking, frankly, for a lot of proponents who'd never really had to wrestle with that and think about that before, and are now being forced to do so. So I think it's an extremely positive initiative in that sense, but it's also, I would argue, and this is implied in the last question in the chat, it's also a fragile initiative because it's not clear to me that it's necessarily something that will survive a change in government, but it's certainly having an impact at this point.
Thank you. Hjalti, I think you also wanted to comment.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Robert, and Harpa and Michelle also talked about this. And I wanted to mention that in my closing, but I forgot. So I'll put it out here. The will and engagement of leadership is key to everything. And that goes for, governments all the way down. If there's no political will, neither within governments or within leadership structures in corporations or companies, nothing's going to happen. You can have a single voice in a desert shouting gender equality, and if all the ears are deaf, nothing's going to happen. So, engaged and willing leadership is so important, which then again comes into diversity and leadership. The more diverse the leadership, the more chances you have of getting heard when you're talking about these issues. Just wanted to, emphasize that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because timing is really coming up to an end, but I did want to address one last question, which has come in from Karen. So she says that we've talked a lot of women in the companies operating in the Arctic, but she's curious to hear more about the impact of women in the Arctic communities. In Canada, we have implemented gender-based analysis, and it has been a bit of political divider and maybe risks being reversed with a change of government. How is industry embracing this tool, and is it now considered best practices? She imagined that this may be more common in Iceland than in Canada, but perhaps that's not an accurate assumption.
I can perhaps address briefly just one part of the question, and I'm not addressing the one. There are definitely better persons, Michelle, to speak about whether industry is working with this tool. I think what we can say, because we partly look in the studies that were done on this particular provision of gender-based analysis, or GBA+, as it was put there. I mean, the one thing is that it was not, of course, it was not designed for everyone, for public and private sector altogether. It was for public policies, for public actors engaging with these processes. So they would start including gender-based analysis in their work, and including the consideration of different gendered impacts on the communities. That being said, so far, it seems that the implementation of this tool kind of reached only partially its goals. I mean, oftentimes there have been cases where it's been more a kind of a checkbox that this kind of analysis was done. The truth is that the actual gender-based analysis is a really thorough tool, the one that requires time and resources, and oftentimes, well, to have it properly incorporated and implemented, that's not a quick fix and not a quick step for the processes to take. For Iceland, of course, I will look into other speakers here in the panel to address this part. But I can say that from Norway's experience, looking into gendered impacts of the project is a very rare practice. it is really not common to look into diverse impacts that energy projects might have on the communities. This is oftentimes not the lens with which consultations are designed, looking into different demographics and understanding how different groups look at that. So I think it is also interesting that as we are moving forward, especially with the green transition, and of course, in many ways, Nordic countries are in the forefront of some of these developments. At the same time, it is not that we have it all. I think the field for improvement and advancement is definitely in all countries and in all Arctic contexts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vesha. I want to wrap up as we are a little bit over time. Again, I want to thank all the distinguished guests, of course, our amazing panelists. We are always pleased to work with the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network. We will be having our 3rd series. And for all, we just want to make sure that you will be receiving a link to all the recordings, and we would love to get your feedback that we'll be sending out. Again, a huge thank you to all of you, wishing everyone a great day, and looking forward to continuing the messaging.